So I've been sitting on this idea for a few weeks now to just kind of discuss my history with TCG, spanning back probably like 16, 17 years at this point. And I was hesitant to make it because I really couldn't find a focus for it. And then on top of that, I feel like this is a better video to make when there's an audience who actually wants it. But through encouragement by TJ in the comments, I am here to actually make that video. So this video will just be me rambling. I will be throwing images up here to show off like cards from the other card games or the logos, just to kind of help out with some of the things I'm going to be explaining. But ideally, I'll be explaining it well enough that you can just listen to it in the background and can kind of tab out to whatever else you need to do. And furthermore, while this will be also going over the history of my TCG experience, I will also be trying to put a focus on explaining those TCGs, specifically by request of TJ, as they are someone who is new to TCGs and just kind of wants a general overview. So I'm here to provide that while also kind of making it a bit more personal to myself, as I think it will give a lot of great context for who I am as a TCG player, why my content is the way it is, and also kind of like little things how I approach gameplay and building decks and such. So to start this off, I want to go over some dead TCGs that I played, because actually the first TCG I really got into is a dead one now, thanks to lawsuits with 4Kids. If all of you know what 4Kids is, you'll understand why. You'll understand. So Chaotic is a game that was out around 2007, 2008. I really should look up the actual dates. Let me go do that. Yeah, I was right. It was like 2007. So I got into it due to seeing it on Saturday cartoons on the 4Kids network and instantly loved it. While Yu-Gi-Oh had been out as the first TCG show to show, well, the first anime, or I shouldn't even say anime, the first show to show the characters actually playing the game, Chaotic kind of followed it up, but in a different way, as they would actually go not only play the game, but also go explore the world which the creatures on the cards were from. And to me, that was really cool. Also, Chaotic was pretty easy to access, so I got the cards and started playing with my brother. And I had a lot of fun with it. It's very nostalgic, though I will say, looking back on it now, since I only played it kind of nostalgically, I mean, I was like 8, so I wasn't really playing competitively or strategically. I was just throwing what I thought was cool together. But looking back on it, I can definitely see, I think I can say that Chaotic would not have survived long, even without the lawsuits kind of shutting it down. And the reason why for that is because it almost felt like it was trying to be a sophisticated card game by making the gameplay itself very complex, when honestly the most successful card games are pretty simple to understand, and the complexities come with the interaction between the cards themselves and nuances within the gameplay mechanics. For instance, I'll show this, I should do it this side, creature card here. As you can see, they have so many different stat points. You've got courage, power, wisdom, speed, their health, and then their music count. It's not very important to know what like music is. Just know that all these, you have 5 or really 6 different stats that you actually need to keep track of during the game because they matter a lot. I mean, 5 of the stats matter for the combats directly, and then the music count is just something separate you have to keep track of. So that's actually a lot to keep track of in one game. And sure, you can easily keep track of it on pencil and paper, but knowing the game, how it's also very unique in that your creatures aren't in a deck themselves. You actually set them up in a little diamond format with your opponent. So it can either be one creature versus one creature, 3v3, it could be a 6v6, 10v10, so on and so forth. But as you start increasing in that number, that's way more to keep track of. And you'll be doing multiple combats with creatures as long as they don't get destroyed. Therefore, it's a lot to keep track of, and you'll go through a lot of paper doing it that way. And back then, mobile phones weren't a thing, so apps, I should say they weren't a thing, but they weren't a thing in the way they are now. They were not commonplace, and therefore there's no like apps to easily keep track of it all. So it made it very tedious to keep up with. And honestly, well, I should back up. How the game is actually played is, I said, you have it in the diamond format. You can attack creature versus creature. You have a location deck to determine the location you're fighting in, which has specific effects and also determines who goes first. And you have an attack deck full of cards that are the attacks you can do that deal damage, or other various effects such as increasing or decreasing stats. So you've got kind of had a lot going on there, and it sounds really cool on a surface level, but it ends up being a lot to keep track of and can make the game feel like it really drags out. Because on top of it, you'll find when you get into the actual combat, it's just a lot of back and forth. Like, I play my attack, you play my attack. There's very low interactivity aside from passing back and forth like that. So while it certainly sounds very interesting to learn, and it most certainly is, I think once you actually get in playing it, the flow is just kind of off due to all that complexity that is built in. That being said, though, for an online client, this game I think worked, if I remember, worked a lot better. And actually, funny enough, they beat Pokemon to the online client because Chaotic, pretty much right out of the gate, had an online client to play it, meaning it was a bit easier to keep track of those numbers and such. It definitely worked better that way, in my opinion. And it was also pretty cool because all the cards had little codes on them. So whenever you got whatever card you had, you just entered the code and you had it. And granted, it was unique, so like your friend couldn't also enter it. But that was just really cool to kind of see the forefront of that sort of technology and that side of the TCG industry, even though it didn't really survive. And Magic the Gathering Online Duel Masters? Hold on. Whatever the Yu-Gi-Oh client is, Duel Masters is the name of the game. Master Duel, there we go. But Master Duel and like Pokemon Online all exist now. But Chaotic kind of predated all of them and pretty cool. The other notable thing that was interesting about the game was that the 5 out of the 6 stats, the courage, power, wisdom, speed, and energy on each card was actually randomized within a specific range. So each creature, like you could pull 2 of the same creature and they would have different stat lines, which is actually quite interesting. But at the same time, for competitive, if you get some that are strictly better than the other, that means that some cards will actually have a really high price point, and it can actually... I can't imagine it feels too good because you just have an objectively weaker version of a card than someone else. It just kind of encourages you to keep pulling for the card with the better stats, which is quite interesting to say the least. I don't think that's very good for a competitive game. But again, I never got into competitive to know. These are just mostly like hindsight thoughts. Other than interesting to know about Chaotic is it could potentially be making a comeback. I've heard trickles of information here and there, but nothing like super official. So at this point, I'm just chalking up to more like rumors of like the creator wanting to bring it back, but how feasible it is, I don't know. I also heard that they're wanting to release the unreleased set because what I'm pretty sure happened was they had a set all ready to go, and then the lawsuits hit, and they just had to like just stop the anime, stop the cards, and that was that. So they have a whole set all prepared to release. They just never got to printing or releasing. So actually, I might have gotten to printing. I don't remember. But point being is that I heard talks about the creator just wanted to release that set to start out with. And while it's great to get like nostalgic fans back in, I don't see that being a great strategy overall. I think it really would need a reboot, kind of like what Bakugan did. That way you can also get a new audience starting out to help the game grow. I don't think the existing player base will be enough to keep it afloat for more than like a year. But with Chaotic out of the way, that's like the main one. I also played a few other TCGs that are now dead. And let me just list them real quick. That being Redakai and Kaijudo. Kaijudo notably being a second attempt to bring Duel Masters to America. I don't have too much to say about them, as I remember playing them, but not at a competitive level. So especially Kaijudo, all I really remember is I just didn't like how the game flowed. I felt building decks very overwhelming, balancing out between the different costs. I just didn't have much fun actually playing it. As for Redakai, they're an interesting case in how trying to diverge from the norm can end up hindering your game above all else. Because Redakai was notable for having plastic cards that were transparent, so you can stack them on top for like the combat, like you would have attack cards, and they were like textured, so it had like, it looked, as you twisted it, it would look like the picture on it's moving. So really cool looking, and really cool that you could kind of stack the attacks on top of it to show the damage. But in the end, it just meant you couldn't sleeve them, and you needed you needed some way to be able to hold those stacks in place, but also something to hide your hand, because you couldn't put in card sleeves. They're transparent. Your opponent can guess what you have. You would need extra stuff to be able to play the game. And while the creators of the game did provide that, that just means you have to pay for it. It's not as simple as just going to pick up a deck and playing. So that's one of the other reasons why I think that game ultimately failed. So shifting over to games that are not dead, the first one I want to talk about is probably Yu-Gi-Oh!, as that was the biggest one I got into. And I don't really have too much to say on Yu-Gi-Oh! That I haven't already said in my previous video about how Elestrals changed my opinion on Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'll put a card up above, links in the description, also put it at the end of this video for you to go check out if you're curious about my thoughts on Yu-Gi-Oh! Really all I have to add to it is that it's definitely a nostalgic game, but I don't actually recommend people... I shouldn't say that. I recommend people try out Master Duel? Yeah, Master Duel, as it's a really easy way to get into it, learn the rules, see how it goes in an environment that you don't have to necessarily know all the rules. Like, the game will hold your hand because stuff can get complicated. But actually going into the TCG, it's super expensive. I don't really recommend it. I can understand why people like Yu-Gi-Oh! and like the whole like you're just trying to set up a puzzle for your opponent to navigate to see if they can out it and such. But honestly, I think you can also get that experience in Elestrals in a lot easier form right now. So I'd almost say try out Elestrals first as opposed to Yu-Gi-Oh. The only difference would be Yu-Gi-Oh is a bit easier to get a community, to find a community for how that community will behave towards you. I can't say. I've heard mixed opinions. I generally would like to believe that most communities will be willing to be friendly and teach you the ropes, but I can't say that for sure. So that's the only additional thing I have to add on to Yu-Gi-Oh! So let me move right along to Pokemon, which I also got to around the same time. That was after Chaotic ended. So I've been collecting Pokemon cards, but actually playing it would have been around that time, like 2008, 2009, but also really starting to buy Pokemon cards around Black and White era in 2010. And while I don't really have much to say about the meta, it was a lot of fun. It's a really easy game to get into and just have fun, especially if you're already a fan of Pokemon. It's also where I also got my first shop experience, just like one shop tournament. Didn't do well because, I mean, obviously I'm a little kid. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was still fun getting to interact with the community who liked stuff. I got to learn stuff as well, so that was pretty neat. Really had more of an impact later on when I found another card shop that I wanted to go to about a year ago, actually a year and a half ago at this point, so fun memories from that. But when it comes to actually talking about Pokemon as a game, I've had mixed opinions for a while, but I kind of settled in that I think it's definitely an interesting game to learn, and it's very different than a lot that's out there. Because of course you have your Pokemon that you play out, but you can also evolve them to more powerful forms, which is pretty cool. And then like the trainers with the items and supports, stadiums, those are pretty cool to just kind of, it kind of feels a bit like Yu-Gi-Oh! In the sense that you can play them out without there's no cost to them. The only thing that costs stuff are your attacks. So that's pretty interesting. And I like the fact that the game lets you do a lot of searching and drawing to find your pieces in a game that relies a lot on your pieces. So that to me is really, really cool how they go about that and that it isn't broken. Because in most games, when you can just discard your hand and draw 7 and once per turn off of what card effect, that isn't like, it doesn't take up like any sort of normal summon or anything, that's phenomenal. So I really like that, and it kind of sets up that you're more just trying to set up your Pokemon or your strategy to execute it in a way that you can beat your opponent. Kind of like trying to find how your strategy bounces off the opponents, and I think that's really cool, actually. Though I'm not a huge fan of the prize card system, as some of your stuff can get prized, but it's also quite interesting to think of, being able to recognize what's in your prize and what's not. Still not my favorite system, but you know, if you're going to play a game, sometimes you have to accept the stuff you don't love, and I don't think the prize system is a deal breaker for me, nor should it really be for anyone, as you have to get very unlucky for all your pieces to end up in your prize zone, in which case it's just like it happens. It's 1 in a million. Just laugh it off and continue as long as it's not a major tournament, in which case I'm so sorry. I think here's also a great time to bring up Magic in conjunction with Pokemon, because both of them have their main resource system within the deck itself, Pokemon being the energy cards and Magic being the lands. I actually don't mind the energy cards as much as because they enable attacks as well, instead of cards you play. And there's, again, they make sure you can draw plenty, search out plenty. You still have to run the proper ratios to make it worthwhile. And that, as a kid, was really intimidating to me. But now I realize that just as part of deck building, it's a good part to strategize with. So it's actually not too bad. And I do prefer it actually over Magic's system, and that's just because I don't like the feeling of, again, I never really played Magic too much, but getting into Magic, it was a huge kind of stopper for me when I just have a handful of lands, and I'm just like, well, I need cards to play, but I don't see any of them, so I just follow behind in tempo. Or the opposite, this one hurt worse, I would have all these cards in hand I want to play, but I just wouldn't draw my lands, so I couldn't play them. I couldn't do anything, and that to me wasn't very fun, honestly. But I like in Pokemon that you can do a lot of stuff on your first turn. You can play a ton of cards. I think that's the most fun thing, playing cards in a game. So I always love games where you can play a lot of cards per turn, and you can have that control over it, which I guess is another point with Yu-Gi-Oh! Just kind of limiting your normal summon to 1. I didn't always like that, as it felt like it limited how much you could do. I think it was necessary for how the game rules are, but alas, in terms of like keeping up with it over the long term, I definitely think at least at that stage of my TCG career, I didn't like how limiting it was. And actually, I'll bring up this as a good point of focus between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Elestrals. I probably said it, I'll say it again. The reason why I don't think that limiting how many cards you can play per turn doesn't bother me as much in Elestrals as for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is because in Elestrals, you have really powerful effects. So it's more so utilizing your effects the most effectively versus just playing out a card. When Yu-Gi-Oh! You got vanillas and such. So I think that's the difference. It feels like even if you're objectively playing less cards in Elestrals than, say, Digimon or Pokemon, that's a good point. You're playing less cards. You're still doing something. You're still doing more than Yu-Gi-Oh! Or I should say old school Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is why I don't mind Lestrals as much, despite it not necessarily falling to that my whole enjoyment of being able to play quite a few cards per turn, because you're choosing what card to play and getting the most out of it. It's just a fun difference. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, the issue was that it didn't feel like the cards ever did enough. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm setting up this creature and hope it survives so I can go up into something. I don't know. The card effect difference is very noticeable between Elestrals and Yu-Gi-Oh! Is what I'm trying to say here. But back to Pokemon, did like having all that draw to be able to do a ton of stuff, set up a ton of stuff. That's super fun. Another thing I don't like, though, is the kind of new high rarity stuff, the EXs, GXs, or the Vs, VMAXs, V-Stars. I don't really care for them all too much. I get what they're going for, high risk, high reward, they're stronger stuff, but you take 2 prizes, super flashy, super awesome to open in packs. But in terms of gameplay, especially the VMAXs, since you set up 6 prize cards, the fact that 2 VMAXs need to be knocked out for you just to win, I don't know, it's never very enjoyable, and it rewards OTK-centric formats, or OTK-centric play styles. Just how fast can you knock out your opponent's stuff? So it ends up just being like who can set up, and then who either has like the boss's orders to pull up Pokemon to just OTK them, or who can execute their strategy faster or in a better way. It just isn't as fun. It isn't as the kind of back and forth you get there isn't what I really like. Kind of similar to like how I don't care for Yu-Gi-Oh's kind of negate-centric type format. I like interaction when you're actually playing stuff than instead of denying your opponent's stuff. That's kind of the best way I can put it. To an extent, I should say. I have no problem with decks existing that do that, but when all decks do that, that's when I have an issue. So that's kind of my opinion on those, and why I'm actually super excited for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet TCG going back to lowercase EX, as I'm hoping, even though it's still like if they get knocked out, you take 2 prize cards, that's still a bit slower, still having to evolve stuff up, means that there's going to be more variety and power instead of just dropping like a 200 some odd HP basic Pokemon and then quickly going up into like a 280. It's like, instead, I think I'm hoping it's going to be a lot healthier and a less OTK oriented. Not much has been revealed, but I'm certainly curious to see what they do, and I'm definitely going to give it a try, hoping that I might end up enjoying it, or even if it's still okay OTK oriented, hopefully maybe it'll slow down to be a bit more different interactivity aside, even if there's still some OTK stuff going on. So we'll see. That's my opinion on Pokemon. Definitely still would recommend trying it out, especially the build and battles. Those are super fun. I did, my 2 brothers and I each got a build and battle and 2 extra packs and built a deck around it and pretty much did it commander style, where it was just the 3 of us versus each other. So that was actually really fun. That actually brings up the final point I wanted to make about Pokemon. In terms of like opening packs and such, I just think it's crazy, the power gap between the weakest and the strongest cards. The fact that a lot of your common slots are just Pokemon, where it's like, oh cool, pretty art, but they don't do anything in the game is the thing. I think it'd be I personally find it way more interesting to have more cards like the Inteleon line with the Shady Dealings, where they can search out stuff, so each piece has a use, even if you're just evolving over it, so you're not like seeing like your Sobbles anymore, but that sort of thing where you can get use out of each piece instead of just running cards because you need them for the evolution line seems way more interesting to me. So that's not like a deal breaker for Pokemon. It's one thing that I wish they would explore a bit more, as it's a little grape for me. Moving on from Pokemon, though, I think the next most important game for me to talk about is my favorite game, Cardfight Vanguard. Can't not go talking about that. And as you've seen, I have been uploading Cardfight Vanguard videos recently, and I've been talking about fully intending on doing so. So Cardfight Vanguard actually I discovered it at just the right time for me, and I've been able to kind of grow up and have really learn and grow through my adolescence, and not kind of have that little kid nostalgia for it, which I think really hinders me in games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays. But the big thing with Vanguard is that it kind of had a lot of the things that I didn't like about Yu-Gi-Oh! And that I could actually build my deck around a card and be able to actually use it most of the time as since they've got the main Vanguard, which really can't be removed by your opponent's card effects, you can just make sure that you go into it. You can use this cool flashy effect, be that powerful card, and do what you want. So that's kind of how I got into it. But I actually like a lot more about it. More so for starting out, I like the trigger system for two reasons. One, it was exciting, and two, I liked how the game was never truly over in most cases until you flip over that 6 damage. And that's what I didn't like, is that I would feel like in other games, I've just lost. There's no way I can come back. And I was stubborn, so I was just like, I would go until I had properly lost instead of just saying, yeah, that's it, I fold. And while my mind has changed on that, and talked about that in the Elestrals Yu-Gi-Oh discussion video, for back then, though, that was huge for me. And I still think I get more enjoyment, and I love having a game where it really does come down to that final check, whether or not I've lost. So, and the nice thing is, Vanguard has also gone to a place where the luck system isn't so disproportionately more powerful than the actual like card effects and game mechanic or other game mechanics, to where it just kind of makes the meta game luck-sacky outside of the over trigger. That's a whole nother discussion. But I do like the trigger system. I feel like it also rewards good players for being able to understand that, even if sometimes, you know, you'll get a bit lucky with triggers. But that's just how it is. If you're a Vanguard player, you accept that to an extent, again, looking at the over triggers. Another thing I've grown to really appreciate about Vanguard is how they do the resource system. I also kind of mentioned them that you get multiple cards per turn. Like you get your one normal draw and then you get your drive checks. That's also really nice. But also the fact that you've got 2 resource systems to kind of balance out your card costs on top of just the number, like your cards on board or cards in hand, so card advantage pretty much. And to me, that makes paying for card costs and like assigning card costs way more dynamic and interesting, and also kind of lets you get away with not limiting how many cards you can play per turn, which is also really nice. Other than like the 5 rearguard circles, obviously that's a hard limit, but you can overcall stuff. So it just means that how I look at it is Vanguard is a game that your victory or how well you do is determined on how effectively you utilize your card effects. And that I love so much, because a lot of times the decks end up being more than the sum of their parts. And to me, that's way more enjoyable than just back and forth attacking, make sure you have the higher attacker, you have the out. To me, that's way more fun. So that's one of my personal favorite things about Vanguard. And then on top of that, I also love the guarding mechanic. It adds a very simple, clean, yet interesting way to interact with your opponent on their turn that isn't just negations, destructions, and all that. I also appreciate that they just keep the guard values in increments of 5,000 shield power, as it makes it easy and makes it doesn't overcomplicate deck building, but it also does add just like enough layer of complexity where you really need to understand how those numbers matter, kind of how much shield your deck needs, and guard patterns as well to most effectively guard. And I feel like if it wasn't in increments of 5,000, it would be way too much to balance as well, kind of getting back into chaotic on that one. So I do really appreciate that simplicity, but I feel like there's just enough complexity where I love it. It's just fun interaction. You don't have to just sit there during your opponent's turn. You actually have to be thinking of, oh, how am I going to guard this? How do I need to stop it? What do I guard it? Maybe I want to take a damage to be able to use effects next turn. There's just a lot of fun nuance there that makes gameplay and learning the game so much fun, in my opinion. But it's also not that complicated to get into. These are more like higher level thought processes as well. Vanguard will also always have a special place in my heart, as it's the first game that I built my first successful deck and has really made me become more of a confident deck builder. And I attribute this to the first Vanguard reboot, which I don't think was that great. But at the same time, they had simplified the game so much that it allowed me to focus on how the game is actually played, and also like better strategies, and this more simple card pull out made it easier for me to build decks while it was really complicated in the previous era, G era, with all the strides. So despite that simplicity end up meaning that the formats got stale pretty quick and Vanguard got pretty boring at times, it definitely let me focus in less on the deck building aspect and being overwhelmed by that, and also just learn a lot of good lessons just of the fundamentals of Vanguard, which I really appreciate. And while it was a bit unfortunate that Vanguard had to reboot a second time, I think it was the best thing for it, as I felt like I've just flourished in this format, having a better understanding of the basics of the game itself and of deck building, now allowing me to better handle some more complicated decks. But at the same time, I think Vanguard is a phenomenal game to get into, because how they release their support stuff, it's pretty easy to kind of pick up a deck, build it. There's some simpler decks to build, some that build themselves as well, but there's still a lot to learn about them, some stuff to test, and then you can just kind of grow with that deck as more support gets released. And that's just how they divide stuff up into the various nations or clans of old. It's just a really nice way to kind of limit the card pool, limit how overwhelming it can be, and just how they organize stuff, I think, lends very well if you're trying to learn how to deck build and effectively deck build, but also learn the game effectively. So I could go on for Vanguard forever, but I think I covered all that I really wanted to in this video. And I would, since Vanguard is one of my main games, of course I can make more videos on discussing like certain strategies, good tips for new players, how to deck build and such. So definitely could do play more of that. So since I've discussed Vanguard already, I think it's also important to talk about 2 other Bushiroad games I tried, that being Buddyfight and Luck and Logic. I really don't have too many memories on them. I just remember Buddyfight. It was fun, but I never knew how to handle it. I just got too overwhelmed by it. And I think thinking back on it, I was overthinking it. And that was my main problem. And then as for Luck and Logic, I think I forget what video I watched actually. But I think that the best way I've put Luck and Logic is it's kind of like chaotic. They tried to be too complex with the game mechanics, so the actual gameplay kind of dragged to a standstill, and it wasn't very fun. It was interactive, but it was very slow. There's a lot of numbers to keep track of. It got overwhelming at times. Both of them died, so Buddyfight, unfortunately. So I don't really have much to say on them, as I also didn't play too much Buddyfight. I pretty much would like try Buddyfight at a low of Vanguard and just be like, okay, well, how do I properly know how to use these and such? So I definitely had a long way to go before I would have been able to effectively play Buddyfight. I cannot speak. Effectively play Buddyfight, because I think you really had to be able to kind of focus in on stuff and kind of push aside all the other variables that could possibly come into play. I know it's a very general sense, but I honestly don't have too many memories of it. That's just my general impression of what I remember. Moving on to one of the most recent card games I started playing, and that being Digimon. And this one I actually really like because I thought it did a lot of stuff interesting that I hadn't experienced before. That being the memory gauge, which I think is one of the best ways to handle a resource system, and it's super interactive, which I really, really liked. And because that's one of the things I hate about like traditional mana systems, such as you see in Hearthstone, is it's like it limits what you can do, so you have to like have your 1-drops, your 2-drops, so on and so forth. But here, instead of having to kind of tempo out your game plan like that, instead it's just how much memory do you want to give your opponent? How much memory do you have access to? And to me, that was way more exciting. On top of that, I love that they have the breeding area, so you can build up to a big ultimate or mega level Digimon before you push it out to use. But also you can go wide on the board and spam stuff out as well. Both of them are optimal strategies. And because of that memory gauge kind of passing it back and forth, it's a great way to limit what you're able to do. But also it kind of gives some good back and forth between you and your opponent. If your opponent gives you a bit more memory, you can do a bit more, and vice versa. So I really like that about Digimon, and I love every time you Digivolve, you draw one. So you can see a ton of cards. You get to go through your deck super quick. I really do enjoy that aspect of Digimon, and I don't regret getting into it. I also feel like Digimon really helped me become a better deck builder as well, as I kind of become more confident with Vanguard and was able to start fresh with a new game. I still definitely do net deck, but I'm feeling a lot more confident just kind of taking those net decks, those basic ideas, and kind of expanding upon it. And I think the reason I really net deck with Digimon is just because there's so many options out there, especially since I started late, and they keep supporting decks. And there's really no limitation on what you can run in a decks outside of ban list. It can be very overwhelming to start with for sure. So unless I had like a concrete idea, I just kind of net deck. And I think that's actually an important lesson to learn, is in games that are typically more complicated in deck building, I think net decking is perfect if you don't have like a set idea of exactly what you want to run, especially starting out. So that's a good lesson I learned about Digimon. But I'm probably going to make more Digimon content as well, as I do have in my channel banner the Digimon card back logo. I haven't made any on it right now because it's kind of in a lull waiting for set 10 cross encounters. And also I kind of got burnt out with set 9 X records. I can kind of see why one of my favorite content creators to follow, Different Fight, aka Chris, why he has taken a break from Digimon during this time, because the OTK format, it seems super exciting going into it, but once you kind of see the OTKs, it's just kind of like, okay. Because the idea behind OTK is your opponent really can't stop that. And that only can be so fun to see so many times before you just kind of feel helpless. And on top of that, the deck I was wanting to play the most, Alpha Monoryuken, was the boogeyman of the format, and it just wasn't fun for anyone else to really play against. And I think that's an important thing to learn with a local community, is it's not just about you playing the decks you want to play, it's also what decks will you have fun playing against other people with, and part of that is their own interpretation or their own perception of what you're playing. Because definitely just kind of seeing your opponent be like kind of giving up because they just see that you're playing the best deck in the format isn't very fun, frankly. So that's another important lesson I learned. Another important one I think that new players should also keep an eye out for. But also to understand, like, it does suck when there's a card you're looking forward to. It looks super cool, but it ends up just kind of being that kind of boogeyman in your local card shop or your local play scene. So, and that's kind of the thing why I don't know what I'm quite going to do with Cross Encounter, because I want to build the Shoutmon Crossheart deck, but again, it's just that boogeyman format, even though for me it's just a fun deck. It's a nostalgic deck from Digimon Fusion, one of the seasons I had the most nostalgia with, because it's the first one I actually caught airing just due to not having cable. But I still plan on making content. I kind of want to try out Dark Knight one, so you'll see some of that. And also moving forward, I definitely kind of look at each and see, oh, there's something interesting I might want to play. And since I do enjoy Digimon, there's a local scene. You might see me kind of make deck profiles on what I'm play testing and such. Like, I really do like my Magnamon X Anti-Buy deck. That was a fun one to kind of build and test. And that everyone was just kind of like, oh, that's neat. So can't knock it out. I will say, though, I can't promise anything. It just depends on how I feel. And I'm more into Elestrals and Vanguard right now. So I guess the perfect place to kind of round out this video would be with Elestrals itself. And I don't really want to say too much in this video because I feel like there's so much more content I can create on it that I don't really need to put in this video. And also, I feel like a lot of my preliminary thoughts are already in that Yu-Gi-Oh! Elestrals video, which I will link up again. And of course, you can find it down in the description as well. And so I don't really know what else to say in this video, other than definitely if you want me some more insight into Elestrals as a game itself, let me know whether you want me to make a video about how I approach deck building. I kind of have already started kind of building up on that with my Foamy Armada deck, but maybe go into also some more strategies and such that I think about when deck building or actually playing. If that's interests you being a new player, I'm definitely willing to make that. All I can really say about Elestrals is I've been thankful to get in it from the beginning. It's been super eye-opening to see what stuff I've kind of carried over from my previous TCG experience that I haven't even realized. Some stuff fellow YouTuber Jay Johnny has pointed out. And just kind of seeing how all this has culminated, but also me still trying to figure out stuff has been super exciting. And especially since I'm used to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, just kind of having a game that's very similar but also different to kind of contrast against my other games such as Vanguard has been super good and super informative. Because I kind of blocked out Yu-Gi-Oh! And was just like, all Vanguard superior, yeah. But there's definitely stuff I can learn, and I think Elestrals has been a really great opportunity for me to do so. And my final note, if you're just getting to TCGs, being able to start out in a community from the beginning is a rare opportunity, and I definitely say take advantage of it, because it's easier to grow with the game than have to start from scratch kind of partway through. You feel like you're behind a lot of the more experienced players as well. So being able to just kind of start from the beginning is a very rare and very, I think, good opportunity to take advantage of. So I think that's about all I have to say about Elestrals for right now.